On May 21st, the Supreme Court decided that they were going to hear the Royal v. Murphy case. That's the case that we've all been covering lately. What they're going to decide is whether or not the Creek Nation under the 1866 territorial boundaries constitutes a reservation under U.S. Code. Sterling's got some more information on what we can expect timeline-wise.
Yeah, so right now the two parties in the case are going to be filing their merit briefs, essentially explaining their stance on the issue. Looks like they're due in early July as of now. However, the Royal Party has filed a request for extension based on religious reasons, so it could be moved to later in July, which pushes the rest of the process back, essentially. Depending on if this is granted, response from the Murphy Party will be due in either August or September. The response, again, back to the hat they get one more time, by Royal will be in late September or early October. So essentially that takes us pretty close to when the Supreme Court usually hears oral arguments, which is October, and going on into the next July. The Solicitor General who represents the U.S. And their interests will file a brief also supporting the side that they take, which has been Royal so far in the cert petition and in the 10th Circuit. Also, the process will be open to amicus briefs, friends of the court, so you can expect the Mvskoke Creek Nation, Murphy side, Royal, Oklahoma on the Royal side, along with Big Business probably and some other parties of interest. After that, oral arguments are going to start. Those are going to be open to the public. Like I said, begins in early October through July of next year. And oftentimes, you can expect a ruling in July is when most of them come out. However, none of that stuff is set in stone. In fact, most of the schedule could change, essentially. Also, during oral arguments, other parties in the case can get time to argue, but often they don't. The only one that really does, almost guaranteed, is the Solicitor General.
So, it would be fair to maybe assume that if somebody were, a Creek citizen were to just ask us on the street, when do you think this will be resolved? When do you think there'll be an actual final decision? And it could be maybe fall 2019, right?
Well, it could be about a year and a month from now.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
As soon as that, but it could be longer.
It depends on the schedule.
That's
it
pretty
depends.
Quick for
right.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
But
it's such a complex case.
It depends on how many more delays they have. If they delay anything else, within the case, any of the other filings. So I'd say a year and a half.
And I think too, you talk about the timeliness because. It would be nice if this was the only iron that the Mvskoke Creek Nation had in the fire right now, but it is definitely not the case.
Yeah.
A lot of other things going on.
Right.
Fountainhead property just put into trust. The entirety of the Fountainhead property just put into trust. Big plans there, of course. IHS lawsuit.
The litigation schedule alone, right?
Yeah, right, absolutely.
Well,
just the lawsuits, yeah.
One of the cases, the Bruner case that's going through trial court right now was delayed because of this case.
Of Murphy.
They were trying to see.
And the porch ban thing's been in the background for years now,
Absolutely.
essentially.
The thing that when I think about this case, I think about really it revolves around ramifications. What does it mean for the future and what do we look like going forward? Can we handle it? Is it even something that's within our scope of ability to handle? Like I said, in previous coverage, I've talked with Light Horse Police Chief Robert Hawkins, and he mentioned there would be a need for upwards of 300 more officers, lots more money, lots more manpower, of course, lots more equipment, everything like that. And he, wasn't sure how we get to that point, even the ability to get to that point. But then you have other things where people are really happy about it and going, oh, it's a win for sovereignty and yay, we got a reservation.
Well, I'd like to ask a question about that because as soon as I heard about this, you spoke on the forum, the open forum that they had, the lady coming forward saying, oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
The moment I heard about this, the first thing that flashed in my mind were the cons.
Yeah.
Oh, what does this mean? What is this going to do? What is their what are the pros?
Methinks you are a reporter myself.
Well, I think the cardinal rule is anytime you get a chance to recapture sovereignty, you take it. You figure out the rest later seems to be the attitude.
Sure.
Yeah.
And with a lot of big cases, you have a PR component, and you need to talk up your side.
Mm-hmm.
That's the perspective that we've really seen from the Creek Nation officials is that this is not only a win for sovereignty, but this was how it was supposed to be handled.
Mm-hmm.
That Oklahoma wrongfully took over jurisdiction that was never theirs, and it's just now being challenged.
Yeah.
So if that's how it was originally intended, then that I think you'll see the Supreme Court look that way.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things the state of Oklahoma brings up is they could lose half the state. And the civil implications, they're saying that this could open a can of worms civilly, because who has the right to tax? Does that mean that we pay property taxes to the nation? Now that would in turn fund things like the police force, like we see on the county and city level now, in funding schools and the police force. But
Oklahoma still asks the police non-natives because the Supreme Court precedent right now is still natives don't have jurisdiction over non-natives, and I don't see any component of this case that's going to change that. The other thing I failed to point out is with the briefs essentially and with the oral arguments, it's not like they're going to go in and rehash their briefs each side of the case. Actually, it's going to be largely focused on the questions the justices had after reading their briefs to fill out any details that they need clarification on with the parties in their briefs.
Yeah, and there's a lot to it. I mean, like I said, the vast majority of the issues surrounding this case and the outcome of this case are we don't knows. They're unanswered questions. And our entire job, everybody at this table, our job in life is to ask questions. So this is like a godsend for us as a subject, because
it's also a pain too, because you want to try and answer some questions for people, and it's like no one wants to speculate.
No, well, what's funny is I've noticed as we've gone about this is essentially like when we ask the questions, we get questions back like rhetorical questions from our sources. In fact, we watched a roundtable of lawyers at OU that did a panel on this early on, and essentially they're like, we think it could impact this, and this, but we don't know how. And that's been really the story of this entire thing. That's how Jessica framed her big piece. It's the big case is a question.
Everything we got, too.
As she said, that's what they're asking the two parties. Is it a reservation? And then after that, well, if it is, how's it going to impact everything?
Yeah.
So let's say that it is a reservation. They find that it is a reservation. Like, what's the next step? Like, what do they disestablish it? I mean,
we don't know.
Yeah.
Again, we don't know. I think one of the things that popped up in my mind, recently, Jason can tell you with the Medicaid issue, that the executive branch, the U.S. executive branch, does not necessarily recognize tribal sovereignty. They don't necessarily recognize tribal governments. They see Native Americans as a race, as opposed to, a sovereign nation. And so I don't know if you see the Supreme Court uphold the 10th Circuit ruling. There is talk that maybe Congress would come in and disestablish the reservation. I don't know. I mean, and that's what we're getting. We don't know what would happen, and we don't know what the next steps would be. As far as if it is granted, we do know law enforcement, like Chief Hawkins has already said, we're going to have to hire more guys. So I think that's one of the first steps that you'll see in trying to maintain the criminal jurisdiction, at least. Everything else is probably way far down the road.
Yeah, and I talked Wednesday, I talked with the executive director of NCAI, Jacqueline Pata, and she was discussing how, instances like this, and Sterling said, whenever you get a chance to affirm or strengthen tribal sovereignty at any juncture, don't think about the end game. Just get the tribal sovereignty strengthened and structured and advanced a little more. And to her end, what she was speaking to was the fact that the things like the Medicaid issue that have come up sort of send out this call that from the top down, we're once again seeing a misunderstanding of tribal sovereignty. The famous Mark Treyant question and George Bush answer. We're seeing a misunderstanding of tribal sovereignty, what it means, and and how you work with in a government-to-government relationship from the U.S. government. And that's not a good sign, because this whole case or this whole issue would seem to predicate itself on a need for the people looking at it and in control of things to know what tribal sovereignty is. Mm-hmm. And that we're dealing with individual tribes that are their own governments that are to be dealt with like separate nations, basically.
One of the other things, though, on the flip side, I think it was the Tulsa County Assistant District Attorney, one of the things he mentioned on criminal jurisdiction is he didn't know how it would work, and that would have to become a conversation, because you didn't want weapons drawn and someone shouting, "Are you Native American? What tribe are you enrolled in?"
Not everybody's just obviously Native is essentially what Jessica's saying.
Right,
so
and so
you've got real hodgepodge.
Yeah, there's some issues on both sides, that I think will have to be addressed, before this thing, is fully established. And I mean, they've got a little bit of time with the Supreme Court, a year and a half to try and figure some of these things out.
Well, Sauls, you talked to Attorney General Kevin Dillinger, our Attorney General. Essentially, he said maybe these things could be ironed out with cross-jurisdictional agreements. Yeah. But as we've seen, even with, I'd say, a more basic setup, that those have taken some maintenance over time, and obviously compacting on the civil end, but that's seems to be born out of ongoing negotiations. They have regularly scheduled things where they have to come back to the table and work on them, and we've seen the cross-jurisdictional agreements suspended before too.
Yeah.
So when you get in a more complex arrangement, well, how's that going to go? It seems like it's going to be an ongoing thing if that's going to be the case.
There's nothing that says that they have to, sign those agreements. Like, there's nothing that says that the city of Okmulgee would have to sign over that agreement with the tribe.
Yep.
And so we don't know what that means for those entities, as well as for if the reservation is intact.
Right.
I've kind of drawn it back to the original person, and some of the implications that kind of bears with it is, what does that mean for all those Native people that were convicted, like that have been convicted? If this is upheld and Murphy gets off.
One of the things the same Tulsa County Assistant District Attorney told us, excuse me, that they were looking at that, and they were looking at paperwork and trying to get everything in order so that if this case is upheld, then they can go in and file all the paperwork and have a smooth transition over to the federal court system or tribal court system, whichever court that it needs to go into. But that's another thing that'll have to be addressed too. We're estimating probably about 300 individuals that would have had their cases tried in a state court, that if this is upheld, it would be overturned and they would need to go to a tribal court or federal court.
And when I talked to Attorney General Dillinger, he said as well, like, he didn't feel, and again, it's his opinion, it's not stated fact, and he knows, but he wanted to assuage the fears of like mass chaos and like opening the cell doors and just letting everybody in prison out. I mean, and that's the way some people have thought of it, and had a picture in their mind of. So, that's out there too. And he just, he talked to that.
I think that just raises more questions. I mean, is the tribe going to have to open up its own correctional
facilities?
Sure.
And I asked him about that, and he said that may be something we have to look at. And I thought, when he said that, I was like, oh, man, that's a big piece of this story. The fact that the tribe would even consider building, a correctional facility, which that's a big undertaking.
Well, it's even more money.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
The basis of this is a huge case, and it could affect how life as we know it in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of unknowns, and we'll try and get the answers as we're coming through.
Yeah, it seems like, okay, so you have two opposing sides here, but at the end of the day, you'd like to think that all of them have a very specific interest to see that this goes smoothly, despite disagreements.
Right. And that looks like that's probably a good place to end our discussion today. We'll go ahead and table this.